I'm in the business of wanting to resurrect that triumphant beast in you.
Welcome to The Boundless Body, the podcast with a somatic doctor interviewing innovative thinkers about their perspectives relating to the arts and sciences of therapy. Discover The Boundless Body.
Back to the mystery.
Okay, I'm really excited to have Nkem Chukwumerije. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome to The Boundless Body. Really look forward to, jamming with you about poetry and embodiment and writing.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to it.
Me too.
Are those squiggles or snakes or both or neither behind you? What are those things?
Yeah, they're serpents, serpents and watercolor.
Nice.
It's a series called Ode to My Innermost.
Let's just read your bio here.
Sure.
Then we shall proceed. Okay, so Nkem Chukwumerije is a teacher, healing artist, and creative entrepreneur. As a writing teacher of 12 plus years and a trauma-informed embodiment practitioner of multiple modalities, she highlights how our minds, hearts, and bodies are portals to unique, creative wisdom and deeper authenticity. She is inspired by the soul to human experience, the wisdom of nature, and the magic of intention and belief. Nkem works with writers from around the world in her Wellspringwords studio, where she offers a podcast, a literary anthology, and coaching support for creative writing enrichment. She is the author of the poetry collection, Poetry and the Immediate, a collection of sensed spaces. Welcome, Nkem.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what got you into this poetry stuff and writing? I'm imagining that's in your blood and bones, but how did you get fascinated and how did you find your muse, I guess is one way of putting it.
Phrasing it. Yeah, no, it totally is in my blood and bones. I mean, I come from a family of multi-talented people in so many different ways, but writing and oration, storytelling, and specifically the written word is something that comes very naturally to people in my family. So that's where it's birthed. But on a personal level, actually, my conscious interest has, as a young person, had mostly been fashion design, self-expression through color and clothing and fabric and drapes. And I still love those things. You can't see all of my room now, but I have these things in different parts that you can't see. But at some point, it transitioned to the exploration through words. And I was actually writing it in my personal newsletter to my community the other day that ever since I was around 7 years old, I had a password journal. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's like one of these journals that they used to sell for kids that had a lock on it. Like you had to give it a password. So I love that aspect of it. Obviously, as a kid, it was like a kitschy thing. But more than that, it was about telling my stories to myself in my journal. And I didn't realize that it was something that I would follow a through line with throughout my life because I was so focused on a conscious level on artistic expression and creative expression through fashion. So I found myself in fashion school. I mean, I went to fashion school. I chose to go there. But throughout that experience, I was a peer writing tutor at the writing studio at the Fashion Institute of Technology, where I went to university. And for that time, it was really about helping people with their assignments and exploring through words with other people. It wasn't really about me and my own exploration with words, although I was still journaling. I was still, writing my own assignments, right? Like I was still using words, but it wasn't because I had a particular fascination with words themselves for my own exploration. But after I graduated and worked a little bit in the fashion industry, I went to South Korea to teach English. And then I went to Abu Dhabi to teach writing because I had still this fascination. And even though I was consciously doing other things, subconsciously or on a different level, I was still inspired by this relationship that we have to words and language. So I would always find myself tutoring people or doing writing consulting and helping people with their different projects. If it was academic, professional, or personal, it didn't matter. I kind of pieced everything together. So that way when I landed, I was working at New York University in Abu Dhabi, teaching as a writing instructor in the writing program there. it all sort of made sense because working in arts and humanities, you bring in different aspects of the human experience in this academic form to present. But again, it was still about other people. It wasn't about me. In the pandemic, I started Wellspringwords, which is basically a spiritual development space for writers and artists. We have a creative enrichment studio, podcast, and a literary anthology, as you mentioned in my bio. And still, it was about other people. But I realized at this point, because at that time, a lot was, of course, shifting internally and externally for so many people, me included. And I was having a spiritual awakening or spiritual deepening. It really shifted my perception on a lot of things. And I realized that it wouldn't be enough for me to just make Wellspring Words a space about other people and their expressions through writing. In order for the evolution of whatever I wanted to see, if in order for that to happen, I needed to focus on my own expression because nothing was going to actually come through the platform unless I was actually going to express for myself. Like, how do I use words? What's my language? And of course, I know how to use words very, very well, but are they my words? Is it my vocabulary? Is it my natural cadence? Is it my authentic way of speaking and understanding life? So that started, sort of initiated, yes, my exploration with words. And poetry came naturally in that because poetry is flow. As a fire, water dominant being, those are my dominant elements. Flow is everything. I flow more than I stand still. So using words and allowing them to flow has come with ease for me. It's at this point now, it's about understanding what is it that I truly want to say, and being able to drop down into my inner space to be intentional about my flow.
Awesome. So, as healing artists, a lot of us are sort of forged in the fires of our own initiation and our own pain.
Yeah.
I like to kind of start off with that, start off with the sort of difficult stuff that
Sure.
initiated people into being a healing artist. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about the tomb before the womb, as it were.
Mm. And it's
the difficult stuff
Yeah.
that kind of puts you on the path.
Yeah, well, and this is honestly where the embodied part of it comes in. I didn't realize how disconnected I was from my physiology and from my anatomy as a human being until I don't know if it was even until because I don't say like my physical structure. I've always been very connected to my physical body, especially as an artist who does things with their hands. I need to feel things. I make things with my hands a lot. So that's always been there. I was a gymnast when I was a child. I've been a dancer since I was a kid. And I've been practicing yoga since 2013. So I've been in my body and I'm an athlete. So like I've been in my body, but the physiology, how do things move and the energetic bodies? What does any of that mean? And because I've been such an emotional person, very passionate, very expressive, I like everything out. Like don't keep anything in, just let it all out all the time. Like I want to be free internally. So that's why I express so much because I don't hold anything back. What was the link between those two things? It's not like I was like really asking those questions from a mental standpoint, but I think my body was asking me to follow those threads. So I was practicing yoga since 2013 and it was like a physical body practice, right? Like fun for the activity and for the contortions, the shapes but I love the feeling of it too and I love the kind of community because it was different than the communities that I was in. But in 2019 is when I went to a session that focused on the energetic bodies. It focused on the chakra system. And this is the first time that I heard about that. It didn't feel like I was like things were crumbling in order for me to get to a certain place. I think it was more of a gentle lead in to give me some tools because later on things were going to start to unfold and unlayer and crumble. And even now at this very moment that I was speaking, I'm in a crucible of creation and it feels like things are crumbling. But one of I mentioned before we started recording that I'm training as a soulful doula and one of the tribe members, I should say, another soulful doula, she told me like your magic and power are growing. And it had me thinking like, is that what this feeling is? It's not really things crumbling. It's that energy is calibrating itself in a way for me to experience life more expansively because that's what I've called in. That's what I've made myself ready for. And this is a time when it's happening. So, but to kind of come back to your initial question, me coming into this embodied understanding of myself, trying to fuse the energetic understanding, the energetic bodies with the physical body. That was a gentle lead in, because without those tools, let me just backtrack one step. Then I started studying as a yoga teacher after going, because that's an important aspect of this. Going to the workshops and classes is great. It gave me enough understanding for me to say, I want to know more. And then I, dropped into that aspect of devotion where I started studying. And then I started training in different modalities. And I'm sure those will come through as we continue this episode, so I won't list them or anything, but I needed to have something to hold myself and to anchor myself as I was moving through a lot of psychological turmoil and uprooting, so that way I can understand life from a different perspective. So I can pause there because there's more to add, but I think I'll pause there. Yeah.
The Boundless Body podcast is brought to you by BiTap, the creators of a powerful bilateral stimulation tool for nervous system regulation. I use this tapping technology clinically because it's a wonderful, gentle, pulsatile, tactile stimulation that helps the brain to regulate experience. And what I mean by regulate experience is not just managing the bad stuff, but amplifying the good stuff. So these tappers aren't just used clinically, they're used in many different settings, including with frontline workers, people that have test anxiety, kids and parents, teachers and school counselors, people in addiction recovery, restless sleepers, and people that are struggling with pain management and medical issues. So the benefits are vast. You can go to the BiTap website to get your tappers to help with your nervous system, and you can enter the Brian10 code to get your discount. I hope you enjoy the show. Well, so for the listeners that don't know what a doula is, let alone a soulful doula, can you just describe what a doula is and what a soulful doula is?
Yeah. I like to think of a doula as a gatekeeper. Yeah, a gatekeeper or a threshold keeper, someone who stands in between realities, who can support another or a community and absolutely self from transitioning from one reality to another. And typically the word doula is used in the reference of birth, physical birth, pregnancy, birth, all of these things. And that whole aspect of coming from like non-motherhood or having one child or having two, or moving into a situation where you have a physical child in your arms or another physical child, if it's your second, third, fourth, whatever. Each time you pass this threshold, you are rebirthing yourself into a different person. And people have done it without support, and it's not the way, because as human beings, we need to always be supported. We always need to be connected. Everyone plays their role. The role of a doula is emotional support, physical support. And as a soulful doula, I train through Ayurveda and I train through quantum physics as well. And it's very energetic. It's very cosmic. And it has to do with deepening into our bodies, deepening into our understanding of ourselves, to rebirth what we need to rebirth through the trauma that we've experienced, not just in our own lifetimes, but lifetimes past through our ancestry, karma, right? Understanding our dharma, our why, our purpose, how we move through the world, and doing it through the lens of clarity and intention. We come to a point of neutrality, the 0-point neutrality, as opposed to having things be on a dualistic aspect of good or bad. This is how I'm training as a soulful doula, through the modality of KMRT, which is Kundalini Magnetic Resonance Therapy. So there are practices that we do to support ourselves. I say I'm in training, right? So right now it's really about myself. And as I move to the end of the training, it becomes about bringing other people into the fold. And whether or not the person is having a physical child, we are rebirthing ourselves. And the whole idea is to restore the sacred feminine on the planet.
Moving from one state of being to another, that would include death, I imagine. There's death doulas out there. You talk about death doula-ing as well.
That in my particular training, it's not at this level that I'm training at. I'm not focused on that, but that's absolutely a part of this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to work at a cancer clinic in New Zealand. I worked with First Nations people in New Zealand. One of the just extraordinary experiences that's happened to me in my life as a clinician and as a person I got to be with people while they died,
Mm,
and just extremely transformative. I mean, birth and death are such a mystery. They're the great potencies of being,
absolutely.
and that's why I mentioned tomb and womb, because
Yeah.
those words afford themselves a place of play, and, they rhyme.
Yeah. Well, beyond the rhyming, I think there's also something like it's fun that they rhyme, but if we think about it, if we don't really think about it, we can just observe that there's a sense of connection there, the tomb and the
Yeah.
woman. And sometimes I even think, being someone with like a lot of Pisces placements in my astrological chart, am I in a dream or was my dream the dream? Have I died and this is the afterlife or whatever you want to call it, this
Mm.
living reality? Or what is truly reality, especially because of the hardship that we face as human beings, inherent to the human experience here? Is it a tomb? What are we actually experiencing?
Yeah. Some of the really ancient archaeological sites have humans buried in a fetal position,
Mm,
which, it really indicates this mystical connection between these two, like the snake in union with its tail.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you mentioned before we clicked record the phrase words through the body, and I really
Mhm.
like that. I'm wondering if you could just tell us about how you help steward people into their body through words.
Mm, yeah. Oh, it's a fun one. It's taken a bit of time for me to make it make sense for myself. Because like I said, I gave a little bit of my background that I've been working with words for a long time, for over 12 years, but it was really just words. And then the body piece came separately. I've been fusing them together and making it make sense in a way that's authentic and real. There's this feeling that you can just write about what you're feeling, right? You can just write that I'm feeling this. Is that words through the body or is that just writing the sensations? And what do you want to experience? And is one better than the other? My inclination is always to go deeper. How do we go deeper than just writing about what we're experiencing? It's to know that we're dropping from the mind into the heart and into the womb. Because the womb, especially as a woman, is our core, it's our center, and it's our root. Everything exists in our womb, and that's how we attract. And that's what we send out into the world. So that takes time to drop into that place of gravity, and there's typically also a lot of stagnation that we have to move through to get there. So in the way that I work with my community through Wellspringwords, we work as a collective. We evolve as a collective. This words through the body that you've mentioned, before we recorded, I mentioned it in the context of a workshop that I've given for the past couple of years, typically in May during Taurus season, which is, all about embodiment, sensuality, and presence, really is the way that I take it. The first time I did words through the body as a workshop, as an immersion, it was really about just coming to understand what language exists through your body, being present with the body and being present with your words and bringing those experiences together through poetry, through experimental writing. The second time I did it, I focused on erotic sensations because this was where I hoped as a collective that we were moving to. Once you feel okay being in your body, can you be okay to feel pleasure in your body? That's another level of it. There's so many ways to answer this question. For me, it's like these two aspects of feeling safety, just being present in your body. Like, do you feel safe in your body? And then that second aspect of, can you be pleased by what sensations are happening? How the words come in is that we're always communicating through words in our body. We're always talking to ourselves in our body. Our body is always speaking to us. When we have an ailment, we typically use words to describe it. If it's not words, we use utterances to describe it. Ah, ee, those are expressions that our mind is communicating with the body and the body is communicating with the mind. This sophisticated intelligence as writers that we have access to, or even as humans, it's just that we're letting ourselves have access to it as writers, to use intention to storytell essentially what the body is communicating, how the body is communicating with the heart, how the heart is communicating with the body, and how we want to bring that into the world. And if we take it another level further, Are we creating an extra world, a fictional story? Are we writing into a memoir? Are we writing a play? Are we writing a poem? Are we writing a poem about our feet? How does that come through our experience of our embodiment? Not just writing about the physical, what the body looks like or what it's feeling like right now, but being inside our skin and being inside our body.
So Fritz Perls, one of these psychologists that, who's one of the founders of the Gestalt psychotherapy movement, he has this great term called aboutism. And I like to speak to students about the distinction between description, aboutism, and expression.
Right.
Like description and expression, it's a huge difference. A lot of folks are just like, in this world of just describing. And it can be very challenging for them to find a bridge into expression.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about some of the challenges that you encounter when you're working with people in terms of getting the expression out, getting the words out in more than just the descriptive sense, in the expressive sense, what are, as a midwife, as a doula of expression, what are some of the challenges that you encounter on the way out of description? Or sometimes the way out is the way in, I guess, but.
That's exactly it though. The way out is the way in. And expression is about sensation. I like to, make sort of codify things to make it easier in a logical sense because this work is so emotional and it's so psychic and it's non-rational. We're talking about the feminine principle here, but still, as the person who exists between two worlds, it's important for me to have this logical understanding of it to share with people because we're so often in our rational, masculine, logical minds that we need that to help us bridge into the non-rational experience. When the body has a sensation, that is like an expression. That's an inner expression. And then we have the way that we express that sensation to the external world with however we choose, whether it's the whatever I was doing earlier in relation to the body sensations, or it's through poetry, it's through storytelling. I'm gonna tell you this thing that happened. Like that way that my voice changed with that level of enthusiasm and excitement. It doesn't just come from performance. Well, I hope it doesn't, which is, I can touch on performance a little bit later because this has to do with it. But it comes from the heart opening itself and saying, oh, this needs to be expressed. And so the heart opens itself, it opens through the throat, and we express through that. The voice changes. So to move from just like the aboutism, as you say, and describing something that's happening to truly expressing something, a person needs to be able to come into their sensation. But I don't blame anybody for not being able to do that, especially from the outset if we start working together. And usually when people arrive in the space the first time, they're stiff, I would say. They're kind of stiff. I often don't get people who are like it's fully expressive when they come into this because they know that the space, Wellspringwords, is if they don't know on a mental level, they know when they arrive. It's something energetically brought them to a space of transformation so that they can start to open themselves up and be safe in their own bodies. We're dealing with a lot of trauma. We're dealing with a lot of shame. We're dealing with this experience of having been silenced for generations and generations and generations. And that all lives within our DNA. We want to express a simple thing that happened. And then there are these voices that say, that's stupid. That's dumb. Don't say that. Not like that. Have you seen, all this comparison, all of these things that stop us from actually expressing what we truly want to express. So that's why people write about it instead of writing from that place. And incidentally, like I told you before we started hitting record, in relation to the literary anthology that we have, we just launched issue 2 of our publication. And so that means that we were going through submissions for about a month leading up to putting the publication together and selecting our contributors and whatnot. And one of the main things that we saw in the submissions that we said no to eventually was that people were writing about their emotions, but they weren't feeling their emotions and allowing the emotions to lead the poetic expression. But they would write about it. And I said, I know that you have been through some really interesting experiences. I know, but I want to feel them with you. Like I want to be taken into your inner world through your poetic expression and allow your words to do that. So there's that part of it. Another part has to do with do we have the language to communicate and to express what we want to express? And that's, of course, through words in this conversation. But as a dancer as well, I find even with our dance moves, that we have the language to express in the way that feels good for us, that feels safe for us, that we can actually handle. Can we handle this language? Can we handle these dance moves? Do we know what to do with these things when they start to come out? And so that expression, if we're moving from this sort of continuum of like description, okay, now we've come to a place where we are safe in our bodies enough to feel the sensations and we want to express. That expression on this third level layer may be very chaotic. Like, and then it can kind of set you back. It feels to that place of shame of like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And then level 4 would be artistry, I would say. I know you didn't really ask that question, but now that we're talking about it, it got me thinking about these different experiences we may go through that totally layer on top of each other in this, spiral. But the artistry, and this is where this aspect of performance can come through. The sophistication of our intelligence, right? As writers and as artists, are we performing our expression, or are we expressing a truth in a way that we've crafted it to hit a target or to meet an intention, right? If you know what I'm saying, like that is where that level of artistry comes through. And I would say that many people jump from like the initial describing something to wanting to create art. But the art at the end of the day is not sustainable and it's not felt because they didn't pass through that crucible experience of being in the body and working through the things, or just being with life, being truly feeling life, truly feeling the relationships, watching things fade away and having to deal with the grief and the love and the sorrow and the fear and the shame and the loss and all of the triumph and the pride and all of the things that we move through that eventually makes our expression felt and engaging and compelling and magnetic. So, yes.
I'm wondering if you could describe or express, or both, weave back and forth in between the two,
Yeah.
the process of somebody that you helped
Mm-hmm.
make this bridge, go through this crucible where they were stuck and maybe they were feeling limited or they had writer's block or something like that. And you did some sort of embodiment process. Or maybe it was a words through the body workshop. Just describe somebody's transformative process and how you supported that.
Support it. Yeah. I will start by saying it's a lifelong process and it is a very personal process for somebody. Like I mentioned just previously, when we move through these it's non-linear. So you may go from description to expression and then move back and then move forward and move back and move forward, because every time that you deepen into your own understanding of yourself on a level of authenticity, you come up with more things that challenge you because you're ready for them eventually. But the challenges do kind of weigh you down before you rise up and meet the strength. So, yeah, I mean, like everybody who comes through the Wellspringwords platform moves through some level of transformation. And the funny thing is, it's gentle. It's not, and it's probably because of my own birthing experience of coming into this work. I didn't realize it until this conversation and speaking about it, but my lead into this work has been gentle. So even though it's been really transformative, it's been gentle. I remember specifically one community member who I've been journeying with since 2021. I started the platform in 2020, but in 2021, she started doing workshops and coaching. Like she's been to so many of our workshops and I've coached with her and she's been doing our group course. So she's experienced from the place where I was just teaching writing and more on a craft level to when I started bringing the embodiment in, to when I started focusing on poetry. And most recently, she was part of our editorial team for issue 2 of our anthology. So she understands things from a very personal perspective and from this perspective from Wellspringwords specifically. And she just mentioned the other day during our launch that when she started in the community, she was like hiding behind the screen. She wouldn't really have herself shown on the screen because she was hiding behind who she really was as a writer and as an artist and as a poet. And through the process, it's been layers of transformation in conjunction with her own life, right? In conjunction with whatever is happening and choices that she makes outside of the platform. But through the work that we do, it's meant to add on, it's meant to layer on these ways that you can express and be yourself in your outside life, right? So her transformation has been gentle, and it's been about 3 years now. And she's been on an editorial team like that. You can't do that if you're hiding behind your expression. You can't do that if you're afraid to say yes or no to a given submission because you're like afraid to hurt somebody's feelings about how they're expressing themselves in relation to what the call for contributors was. You need to be clear on who you are as a writer so you can identify what the writing is meant to feel like, you know? And that only comes when you have been through a certain level of understanding, a certain transformation through the process. So I hope that answers your question.
So hiding behind the screen, folks hide behind description,
Yeah.
hide behind your, or we could frame it as a protect themselves
Yes.
with
Yes.
description.
Yep.
Protect themselves by putting a screen of identity out, for example.
Performance.
Do you know what was the turning point for this person around coming out from the screen, and any sense
No.
of that?
No, I don't know with my mind, and I'm not comfortable with like guessing because it feels,
Yeah.
like a very personal journey, especially how deep we
Yeah.
go in the work. Yeah.
For sure. I was just hoping to have a concrete example of somebody having a transformation, just so that we could bring our listeners into a transformative moment of change. So if it's not this person, then just keep it anonymous. Just bring us into a moment, like, so we can kind of join you there, like in a what happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, this question, because I have not experienced those moments with people that it's like this big catharsis and suddenly everything is different. And that's not the point. That's not the point. This is a softer, deeper, evolutionary experience that, just like the moon cycles, just like our menstrual cycles, you don't come to a place where it ends. You come to a place where it continues and it continues and it continues and it continues. And even when, as a menstruating being, I stop bleeding, some other woman is bleeding, and it's it's through symbiosis, her experience carries on. So that means it never even began. It's just a continuous experience. That's the way that it works itself. The more that when somebody makes the intention to show up and we do the work together, they may think it's a very simple thing, but I always get the feedback. This is exactly what I needed. I needed to express myself this way. I needed to be in this community. I need to be seen. There's always that connection that just happens, just so, in divine timing. And then it's years down the line. That's why I have to have patience with this process, because sometimes it's years down the line that somebody's life has completely transformed, but it didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen necessarily only because they did work with me, but it was through the work with me that they got to really feel themselves, like really feel themselves, really see themselves, really start to understand, how do I communicate with myself, and how does that communication with myself open itself up into the world? Because if you don't know that, then you're just walking around this world almost like a zombie.
So it's a gentle transformative process. You're working with folks. I'm just trying to get a picture of what's happening in some of these, because it's a community event. You do workshops.
Yep.
I'm just kind of trying to get a picture of like what are the things that you're doing? Are you doing visualization processes with folks? Are you doing what artistic mediums are you using? Are you toggling back and forth between writing and experience? What's the stuff you do?
We use writing to anchor us. That's like the modality that we use to anchor us in our transformation. So I'll mention the Liberating the Heart, Alchemizing Pain into Poetry immersion that I had a few months ago as like a concrete thing to visualize what we actually moved through. Because this session was focused on the somatic experience and translating our somatic experiences into our writing and using that translation, that transition as the inner alchemy. Like inner external alchemy because we're actually physically writing. So I open up the session with some shaking and tapping through. I'm a Qigong practitioner as well. So I like to use shaking and tapping because it lets us like get rid of the stuff that we're holding on to before we actually, like come into the body. And
Shake it.
shake it off. And tapping is a beautiful way to, I mean, for me, it's better than a massage because you don't have to get deep into it. Most of the things we're trying to solve through massage is just tension that we're holding, that when we tap through our bodies, we release the tension and we're like, oh, okay, I'm good. And then from there, moving into a visualization because we actually have an understanding of what our core sensation is now. So then moving into a visualization of understanding what the body is communicating. And some of it is planned, a lot of it is intuitive because it depends on who's showing up, where they're at in their menstrual cycle. Typically, I'm working with women and what they're bringing to the space, like what they're feeling. And then what I'm sensing psychically, intuitively, where do we go while we're in the visualization and the meditation? What part of the body am I sensing that we need to pause at? Or is it like a full body focusing on each energetic system and seeing what's there? And that's always sort of also determined by what are we trying to create at the end of the day? What is the hope for expression? That's on me. That's not on the participants because I don't want them to even come with anything. Just like come as you are and your experience and your desire to express. But if we're trying to create poetry at the end of the day, we need words for poetry. And we also need a cadence, a rhythm for poetry. So perhaps it's the words that we're looking for within the body. And we're also looking for a certain cadence or rhythm that we can develop through the process. So that's why it's so gentle because I'm not teaching or instructing or guiding from a mental perspective. It's through an embodied experience and even more so through an intuitive experience. But as we may know with our intuition, it's very subtle. It can be really strong, but the intuition will never scream. Very, very subtle. So that means that we need to slow down and silence everything else in order to hear and attune to our intuition. That's how I like to take the process through.
Hmm. So I like to say, like, as a generalizations have limitations, but they can also serve. Like this kind of thought that grief tends to be a taboo emotion for men and rage tends to be a taboo emotion for women. You vibe with that idea?
It seems to track.
Yeah. I'm hearing the gentleness piece, but I'm also sort of imagine if you're working with emotions that, and with women, rage is often one of the suppressed ones that you're encountering.
Yeah. It's so many different emotions. And this is where I think the generalizations have the limitations because then that would come to see like women are just suppressing their rage. And so they the minute that they go to a place where they can open up, it's the rage that comes through. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
And you know, the space that if you have been on the website, for anyone who goes on the website, it's www.wellspringwords.love. You're immediately soothed. You're immediately calm. Your nervous system immediately just decompresses so that way you can actually be present. That's intentional. So not to say that rage is going to be quelled, by a calm nervous system. In some cases, it might even feel freer to come alive, but it may not come through in the expression of rage when the trigger is agitated, because there's a rage that comes through when you're agitated, and that can be a more fiery expression of rage. But as a woman myself, sometimes my rage comes through in the way that I have the drive to focus on my experiences, or even just the way that I hold my pen when I'm writing, right? So the strength that can come through, it can come through in a sense of inner empowerment. It can come through in the way that somebody chooses the story that they tell, as opposed to just like the way that they tell it. They may choose a story to tell that they've never allowed themselves to tell because they feel that sense of clarity. It's fire, right? It's sacred. When you're touching on rage from a sacred place, it presents itself as a clarity. What do you really care about? So those are some of the ways that it can come through in this gentle aspect. And then sometimes people don't go that deep. That's just the honest truth of it. Sometimes they just don't go that deep. They're not ready to go that deep, or the length of a particular session that they're in doesn't take them to that place. Maybe they need to be in a one-on-one container as opposed to being in a group container in order to be comfortable going to that space. Maybe they're not there in their personal journey to allow that. And that's okay too,
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about having a container, a poetic container. This is why I love poetry is that
Yeah.
you can give form to the great intensities of being, like
Yeah.
rage can find creative and beautiful expression in the form of the poem,
Right. Right.
and some of the great poets just have an incredible way with, like I'm thinking about Neruda, for example, at the moment, who just has some of these just incredible lines that are you can tell that he's just got this fire spirit burning through his pen or whatever. And it's just so lively and crackling with fire. And it makes me come alive. It makes the tingles circulate up and down through my spine. It's like, that's when I know what's happening in a group container. It's like when the tingles start going, shh, like that. Like somebody's really plugging into that cadence.
They're feeling it, right? They're not describing it. And there's no way that
Yeah.
you can describe that sensation. You only can feel it. If you are writing from that place, that means that you felt it.
Yeah. Hey, would you be willing to read one of your poems?
Yes, I will be willing to read one of my poems.
That'd be awesome. I'd love to hear your cadence and your flow.
Sure. I'm going to read a poem titled The Origin of Now. And I wrote this poem in the summer. I recently published it on my personal website. It's actually after a poem called The Origin of Birds by Nicole Callahan. And I loved the way that she wrote that. So I was inspired. So the origin of now goes like this. There are ways to tell a story that involve evolving past the previous nature of being. And evolving doesn't just mean change, it means shape shifting and moving through life as though life were wind, and of course, the wind could sing. Evolving through the human heart is like evolving through layers of time, evolving through the layers of the mind. When I catch myself evolving, I wonder if the world will join me. Then I remember evolving is about me and my concept of me. I have often been called selfish for thoughts like these. So maybe I am selfish for evolving past outdated and stricken concepts of we and evolving to recognize the strength that it takes to be constantly evolving. And one day, I imagine, I will have evolved into ether itself. I imagine into earth itself, where the word evolving will be but a memory, inverted yearning. And I will recall how I spent my years yearning and how my yearning spent itself evolving into spirals of desire that brought me into now.
Hmm. Before you were talking about timelessness, that you like your poems to be timeless as opposed to being caught up in political stuff or making a political statement of some kind. I feel that when you're articulating your work here. I feel you there. It's like, yeah, evolving, inverted, what did you call it? Inverted yearning, just this kind of folding and unfolding process of, involution and evolution.
Right.
I love this idea. It's not just evolution, it's involution too. It's like evolution happens from the outside in just as much as it happens from the inside out.
Right. Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about the timeless dimension?
The timeless dimension. The timeless dimension is the only thing that's ever happening, if you ask me. Everything else is a layer placed on it. There's a lot that's already happening in my internal world. There's a lot that's happening in my psychic world, the cosmos, ancestrally. I feel into a lot. So it tends to be a distraction for me to plug into the physical world. However, as humans, we are here to have a human experience. So I don't discount those of us as artists and writers and poets who plug into what's happening culturally and pull from culture to create art, because there's a place for that and it's necessary, right? But for me, on my own, in my own experience, what feels authentic for me is to flow from what my soul is experiencing, or flow from what like my higher mind or my higher heart is experiencing. And in the process of that, all writing that I do is alchemical writing. with my intention, I know that there's something being moved in the way that I write. Even if I'm venting, I vent with an intention. I don't vent to sit at the bottom of the valley. I vent because I need to reach the bottom and taste the texture of it so that way I know what it's like to actually move through life, climb up to the top or whatever that experience is. So there's always an intention. In the writing of the poetry, I may be experiencing the personal human nuances of relationship woes and I didn't like this and my body feels like this and oh, this is happening culturally and oh, what am I going to do? All these things. But what comes through is something of timelessness, always, because that is what my personal poetic is. My authentic poetic is an experience of nature, of timelessness, of the soul, of like something that feels on a different wavelength than the common human mundane reality, which again has its place.
Yeah. It's music to my ears. In my book, I talk about bringing cosmos into clinic. That in psychology, there's so much focus on family and culture. And I'm not saying that stuff isn't important. It is. It shapes us.
Right.
But it's the great cosmic song that can get kind of washed away in this excessive focus on just putting everything into the family triangle and putting everything into cultural discourse.
Right.
That's all important stuff. But the cosmic song,
yeah,
it's right here.
Right. And that's the context that we are really living in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, trauma's a thing. The trauma discourse can derail from that element as well. Just like the content of it, the description of it, the understanding of it, the putting it into the attachment millhouse and understanding everything through the attachment lens and all that. And it exists, right? In your bio, it says that you're trauma-informed embodiment practitioner and that writers often encounter their own traumas and their own blocks. And
Yep.
what can you say about trauma and the creative process?
Crucible is the word that comes up again. And we want to be mindful as artists and as writers that we are not exploiting our experiences in order to come up with something that feels engaging. We really need to be mindful of that when we get to a certain level of comfort with our darkness, I would say, or with our trauma or with the depth of our realities. Some of us start there, right? We start writing poetry because we need to express the darker aspects. And it's the only place that we can really express the sharpness of being a human. When it feels sharp, when it feels like there's no other way to express it, we express it through poetry. And we also want to be mindful. From my perspective, I would say that we are transmuting that. We are moving in not just expressing and getting deeper and deeper and darker, but we're actually moving into an experience of wholeness. And that is, I think, a way of looking at healing that allows us to be a full human as opposed to being someone who doesn't experience any sharpness in this life, which maybe it's sort of a rudimentary way of expressing trauma, especially because the trauma-informed world is growing and growing, and it's becoming this big old industry where everyone is trauma-informed. So we know that we're not looking to not have trauma anymore, or to be fixed. That's not really a thing. But on some level, are we not? Are we not still looking for that? If we just be really honest with ourselves, right? We're still looking to, even putting trauma-informed in front of, we're still looking at, I'm trauma-informed, I should know better. Like we find ourselves in those positions too as humans. And then it involves a level of self-compassion to come back to, yes, I'm human and I'm whole. I'm a whole human. And if I choose to be a whole human, then I choose to have a full experience of everything. So it's a bit complex, this trauma, because obviously there are traumas that we experience and we have experienced in this one lifetime that we're in that will take our whole lifetimes to become comfortable with. Maybe instead of saying move through or work through or whatever, just become comfortable with or be able to see for ourselves that this is what I've experienced. Take a whole lifetime. Maybe we won't even get to it, right? Maybe we'll even just carry into another lifetime or our descendants or whatnot. And then there are those experiences that we have that are traumatic that serve as opportunities for growth, that serve as opportunities for our dharma, our true purpose to come to fruition, right? And so we need our trauma. We need our trauma as much as we need the safe spaces of peace and wholeness and harmony. And I'm saying this as somebody who, as I mentioned earlier, is moving through a crucible right now where I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? You know, what are those moments? And it's just, there's a lot of tears coming out. And I need this. I need this. Yesterday, I was very vulnerable with my parents, and both of them, I felt like they saw me. They actually saw me in my humanness at the same time, right? That's a huge win. But I needed to come to this place of feeling so low that I will allow myself to be vulnerable enough to cry and to call them both through my cries to come and support and be willing to hear them for whatever advice they had to give me, whatever they had to say, and not shut them off with this feeling like they're not going to believe me, which is what speaking? Trauma speaking, past trauma speaking. They're not going to believe me. They're not going to hear me. They're going to all these things that I would have said in the past. But had I not been through those, it wouldn't bring me to this point, which is a healing experience, which offers me a chance to evolve in a certain way. Who knows what comes from that? So we need our traumas, and the writing only becomes richer when we're able to truly be with ourselves and our wholeness.
I'm thinking about the phrase opening through the pain, opening through the pain, opening through the vulnerability.
Yeah.
The phrase that's coming to mind as you're sharing your experience here, because I think a lot of times the soul squints around pain, the body squints around pain.
Contraction.
And so I think this dilation, this dilatory relationship with pain is very challenging, very wonderful, very cosmic to kind of reflect on and to write about and to kind of consider that in your body as you're feeling pain. So you have this wonderful phrase, and I think it's a workshop, alchemizing pain through poetry. Is that a workshop of yours?
Yeah. I was just speaking about it a few moments ago. Yeah. Alchemizing pain through poetry. Yeah.
Alchemizing pain through poetry. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's say that the listeners wanted to do that by just like bringing out a piece of paper and like, hey, let's do the alchemizing the pain through poetry thing. What sort of guidance would you give or prompts? Anything come to mind about, okay, let's do it. Let's get that piece of paper out. Let's alchemize this pain. Let's see if we can open through it through the words and into the body and off and into the page. And
the first thing would be to slow everything down, because as I think I mentioned it to you before we started recording, that experience of that immersion, liberating the heart, alchemizing pain into poetry, was about slowing down our process as writers. As energy moves through and we send them through words, we're a channel, right? Like we're taking words from our understanding, energy from the ethers, bringing them together and bringing them out through writing, essentially through poetry. But this workshop is about slowing down the process so we can actually feel what's happening when we bring these words, as opposed to just writing without dropping into our bodies. So for anyone listening who would like something practical when it comes to this, it's like, yes, this idea sounds kind of grand. Alchemizing pain. Whoa, I'm transmuting energy. I'm like working with all this big energy. We are all the time. That's who we are. That's literally what we're doing all the time, every single day. Every breath we take, we're working with this big energy. But slowing it down, if you have your piece of paper, before you even touch the pen, before you even get to writing, close your eyes and attune to your body. What are you even sensing right now? What are you feeling on your physical body, but what are you sensing internally? And when you come to a place of that through breathing, what are those sensations communicating with you? I would say that is where somebody should start. I wouldn't give any more than that. I'm actually putting together a self-paced course right now, specifically on this. So that will be ready when it's ready. But these things take their time because it's deep, meaningful work. But for the practicality, it's just be present with yourself before you start to write. When you come to write, you're not writing from the mind, you're writing from what the sensations are communicating. And then if you want a third thing on top of that is just to create a poem from that experience.
Thank you for that. So I thought I'd read a line that I love from Rilke about grief, because I think that grief is really transformative, that a lot of folks squint around grief. The body squints around grief, and there's this compression and contraction around it. And I love these lines because they're expansive. So here we go. Where praise already is the only place grief ought to go. That water spirit of the pools of tears, she watches over our defeats to make sure the water rises clear from the same rock. Just love that line. Where praise already is the only place grief ought to go.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely expansive, as you said. It almost makes grief feel like something you want to experience because of its potential.
Yeah. Like collective grieving, I think, has so much healing potential in it. Like rather
Absolutely.
than get together and share opinions. That's a bad phrase. Share opinions. Yeah. Throw around our opinions, like kind of projectiles.
Mm,
Just a place to grieve, and grieve
yeah.
being a song of praise, not as something that's like something to avoid, as a
Yeah.
celebration.
When we're living as whole humans, we're having a holistic experience of life. Grief is an inherent part of that. It becomes a huge part of it. And in my journey as a soulful doula, coming to understand our menstruality is core to the experience because in our menstruality, we have 4 seasons. That's just as my experience as a woman, as a doula, but it extends to all of humankind. It extends to beyond humankind and into the experience of Gaia herself or the earth cycles. There's a season for grieving. There's a whole season for grieving dedicated to grieving. That's autumn. Even in traditional Chinese medicine, it's about grieving. It's about maybe people wouldn't say necessarily it's about grieving, but just in the context of our conversation here, I would say that it is dedicated to grieving in the holistic sense of grieving, which is celebration, right? And letting go, emptying, consciously emptying, celebrating what has been, letting go, and allowing what we have experienced to naturally rise to a higher dimension of wisdom so we can get ready for the winter season to be able to sink into that wisdom and understand it for what it is. After the winter season, we come into a spring season. And that's not necessarily a time for grieving. That's a time to practice opening up and expression and expansion. And then summer, we are living in that expansion and that expression. Every season has its part in our experience of our humanness to cultivate that quality. Because, yeah, in May, you may still be grieving something. That's not to say that you can't grieve in May because it's spring. You're not supposed to be grieving in spring. But it's just to say, if we can understand things from this cyclical perspective, then we are cultivating the qualities that we need throughout our experience of life, in this non-rational way of living.
You mentioned before the term shape shifting. I love this term.
Yeah.
I love to nurture psychic flexibility in the psyche. And
Hmm.
kids naturally do it, right? They naturally do it. It's like, your kid in play is like kind of like a trance, where
Hmm.
they can if their imagination is really there and dialed and nurtured,
Yeah.
they can become an eagle or an alligator or an ant or, some non-human being
Right.
or becoming,
Right.
right? And
That's fun.
I'm imagining it's one of the things that some of the great writers do. They invite a flexibility in the psyche to shapeshift, to
Yeah.
become other than human, to become solar rays or cosmic pixie dust or, an alligator or praying mantis or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just love that. So, I guess the prompt that I'll give you is, how do you nurture shapeshifting in the folks that you work with?
That's a fun prompt. How do I nurture? I never thought about it like that specifically. How do I nurture shape shifting? Dropping into our bodies invites us to experience our multidimensional selves. And that experience of our multidimensionality is our shape shifting quality, I should say. How does that happen? Honestly, it's based on your own personal experience. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I experience it every time I move into meditation, which is all the time. The more that I attune to my inner self, the more I become everything. The less
Mm,
of the me that my ego has created is present, and the more that it is a boundless experience of my being, myself, because I'm connecting to whatever energy is around me. And then that means I can become it's connecting to pure potential, right? It's 0 point neutrality of experience. I'm no longer attaching myself to the past or the future or anxieties, bad, good stories. I'm coming into an observation of all of those things, which means that I'm in a place of pure potential. I haven't yet made a choice. When I make a choice is when I send that energy into a certain kind of form. But that happens through a meditative experience typically. And we can come into that meditative experience as we're writing, as we're creating, which is these serpents behind me, especially using watercolor as a medium, is that experience. Those just I'm gonna create serpents today. And the serpents were coming and they were creating their own form and they were telling their own story. And those serpents, yes, they're serpents, but they're me. And so, especially when we're bringing our creations from the inner space out, we are birthing ourselves and the shapes that we create, in this case, literal shapes of serpents, are ourselves duplicated, you know, cloned, so to speak, and created out. The poems that we create are ourselves, and we're creating ourselves that way. So that's itself a sense of nurturing because to bring yourself out, and it's not going to be you as you are in this form. It's going to be a version of you that's coming out that you need to see or that wants to be expressed or whatever, what have you. But then in like even the crafting of a particular piece of writing, for instance, let's take a poem. You can write a poem from your own perspective as the writer, as a poet. You can write a poem from a perspective of a speaker who is not you. In that case, you've sort of embodied or mentalized another being in order to share a story or write an experience or translate something. But you know on some level that it's not you. And this phraseology of some level is our multidimensional experience because as we're creating, we always have our consciousness that knows what's happening. But then but on some level, I'm actually writing from this place. And then on a deeper level, I know I'm really writing about my mom, for instance, right? So there are multiple levels and layers that are working. And I think the shape shifting is not only taking our physical or our form that we're in now and completely changing it to something else. So our form now is not present. It's just like activating other layers of experience happening at the same time.
hmm. So freeing. And by the
Oh
way,
yeah.
you did us solid by mentioning boundless in there.
It just came naturally.
That's part of the flow. That's how I would want it to be.
Right. Right.
Yeah. To come outside of the kind of assembly line of the ego, because the ego
Yeah.
just kind of takes perceptions and assembles it in its kind of patterned narratives,
Right.
pattern meaning making processes to kind of see things through through other than that, experience things through other than that is so freeing. When I'm in a group space and the facilitator's holding that, I'm just like, oh, yes, I can breathe.
It's freeing, right? That sense of being able to breathe. But even beyond that, there are so many of us humans who are this close to losing our minds and who have already on some level or in some experiences dealt with mental illness to any degree, haven't told people about it, have had instances where they've been in hospital, whatever, because we are going through a mental health crisis all over the world. So holding space for our multidimensionality to be felt and expressed is crucial. It's crucial to our well-being. We need that. I mean, just in you saying that, oh, I can breathe. I mean, that's nice. Yes, but we need to breathe. It's not just something that should come in once in a while. Like, it's fundamental for our health. And that's connected to experiencing our wholeness.
Yeah, that expansive breath, not just the like mechanical breath. The breath that dilates space itself.
Fills your lungs, helps you to actually feel your vitality. Yep.
Yeah. Becoming everything. I love that. You know? I really love that.
I've been mentioning it's a lifelong journey. It's a very personal journey. And this is why there are people like us who are doing this work who have an understanding of the different worlds that exist, because it could be scary to open up into yourself. I know for me, when I started opening up into my art practice, my visual art practice, I had fear of, what if I'm crazy? Because there are so many things that want to be expressed through me, and they don't have a discernible form. I did not go to school specifically for art by choice, so the things that want to come through, maybe they're not going to be understood. And then maybe I'm going to be crazy. And then I started expressing. And I remember I looked at one of my works that I created. I was like, but wait, this is crazy. I actually had that experience. No, this is your expression. This is who you are. This is a communication that is authentic, indigenous to you. And you don't know what magic is being expressed through your creations. You don't know how much you don't even know what kind of light codes you're offering, or when somebody looks at that, what they perceive and how that may change that, which that's why I'm mentioning it, because that happens when people perceive my art. And to hold that back because of that fear of expressing the multidimensional self, see, that's a problem. That's a big problem. And that's why people like myself and yourself and others who are doing this work are so devoted to it, because we need support as we're transitioning into those spaces of true deep expression.
Yeah, like a phase space transition. Physics. It's in physics, it's in human transformation, it's in psychology. We meet various thresholds.
Yeah. Threshold keeper, doula, right? Here we go.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the trickster, because the trickster function, the trickster deities are often associated with the creation of worlds.
Yeah.
And they're also often associated with craziness and chaos and madness. Of course, playfulness and overturning status quo hierarchies and all that stuff. What can you tell us about playfulness, Nkem, and in kind of like transformative spaces, like the benefits of play, the benefits of playing with chaos, playing with craziness?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just briefly, my name is pronounced Nkem. It's all good. The reason why people are curious about it is because we've come to a place in our collective where we need permission to be ourselves, to be authentic, to be human, to be raw, to be wild. We need that permission because we've become so overly ordered, overly logical, overly controlled. We've become overly controlled. And so there's just an inherent benefit in being chaotic and playful and wild, because you get to actually feel yourself. That's the first thing. You're not going to allow yourself to be playful if you don't know how to feel sensation. Sensation is a wow experience. Just being able to feel something is a wow experience. It lets us know that we're alive. So oftentimes we'll find, if we're speaking about trauma, right? If somebody is experiencing such a level of depression and disassociation, disconnection with themselves, self-harm might come into the picture so they can actually feel that they're alive. Am I actually here? But on another level or in another space, you may find, people who are always seeking a sort of a psychedelic experience, always seeking some sort of hypersensational experience because they need to experience the aliveness, like really experience the aliveness. And then there can be an escapism that comes with that. I've been on that in that experience as well. How do we cultivate that sense of feeling the sensation of the now moment? Can I actually feel the palms of my hands? Like on a very physical level, can I feel if I use my nails, can I feel that sensation? And when I finish, do I still feel the lingering touch? Can we slow down enough in our lived experience to attune to that sensation? Or are we so hyper focused on what's happening at the front of the mind that we can't even feel the sunshine on our face and allow ourselves to feel it? It's extremely pleasurable when we are able to feel that sensation. So that's the benefit itself. That allows us to play because when we're playing, it's all about sensation. We only want to feel good and continue feeling good and put together different formulations of what feeling good might feel like. That's play, if you ask me, which you did. So I guess, what does it mean to experience this thing? What would that feel like if I were to experience this? What would it feel like if I were to add this? That curiosity, that play, you allow yourself to be wild. So this is like coming back to what I was mentioning earlier. I don't blame anyone who doesn't know what it feels like if you have been so disconnected from your body for whatever reason since birth. Maybe you've never felt what it feels like to be in your body. Maybe you've just been living in a body of pain your whole life or for most of your life, or after a specific point, you had an accident, you gave birth, you had some sort of emotional trauma, you've been dealing with grief that slowly numbed you away from sensation. You didn't even know that you were not feeling anything anymore. I don't blame a single person for not being able to be open and expressive and in play because it can be difficult in a world where we carry so much. But just to answer your question, the benefit is inherent when it comes to play and curiosity.
Thank you for that. So perhaps the last prompt or question I like to give folks in therapy, I like to give them stuff to do, processes to do outside of therapy and whatnot. And, sometimes folks identify as, well, okay, well, yeah, that's a writing process, but I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
I'm not a writer. I'm not creative. How do you work with that
Mm.
when somebody puts up some
The
identity element
restriction.
like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the context of our conversation, what's coming to me now is like, what do you hope for? What do you hope to experience? Because I love writing for the fact that it can be used in any situation to support us for any reason. And yes, it's easy to say, you don't have to be a writer to write, but like, why are you writing then? Why write instead of doing something else? Right? Why write instead of drawing, for instance, as an assignment? So I would probably start with, what do you hope to experience or what do you hope to achieve? I say like I would probably because the people who I work with are already have a writing practice, right? Or they identify as writers or they want to be, or they've been writing since they were a kid. So they write because they write, they need to write. There's that
Yeah.
element. But if somebody who doesn't have any writing practice or has never written, I mean, it's a beautiful way to connect with self. So if they're working in a therapeutic environment, they're probably trying to connect with themselves, on some level, or trying to come to the bottom of something, understand something, understand something. And in that case, that can be a lead into using writing to support that experience. Just creating a room for yourself in your mind and in your own aura, your own body mind experience with the paper. It's like this is just a space for you to experience yourself a little bit more closely, I would say. I like to use this gentle language, right? Especially for those who
Yeah.
aren't familiar with the form so much and they have all this pressure around themselves to write something that looks beautiful or whatever. It's like, no, you're just experiencing yourself a little more closely. That's where I would start. And then depending on whatever somebody is like working with, or their goals, or what seems to come up from that, then I would maybe give more insight.
Do you work with beginners?
Yes, mostly.
You do. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that space because it's a space
Yeah.
of real transformation. That opening is just so incredible.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
somebody that's like, oh, well, yeah, I've been a software engineer all my life, and I need to figure out a way to creatively express myself. Can you? But I haven't written anything except for code in 25 years or something.
Well, okay, we maybe have different definitions of beginners because usually it's the folks who have some love for words and expression. Because like
Mhm.
Wellspringwords is not just a space for like, it's very particular. It's when you're on the website, when you engage with any aspect of what I put out on the internet, you understand it's a particular space for inner space cultivation and authentic expression. So even if you don't like write regularly, maybe you went to like, I don't know, a mindful meditation class and they had a writing and you prompt and you were like, oh, that's amazing. And then you found the space and you're like, maybe this will lead me more into what I experienced there, but in a deeper way. So in that case, I would consider you a beginner. Or if you just like have a journaling practice and you want to take it into a more professional practice, then I would consider you a beginner in a different sense, right? Because you know how to use the words, you know how to write, but just translating that inner sensation into the external expression could be the beginner element there. But also if you have only ever written code and you want to, I say if you're going to start anywhere, start like this. Start from the inner space,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that you'd like to pitch? Do you have any workshops coming up or anything that you'd like to put out there besides Wellspringwords?
I mean, we always have online immersions happening. So if you go to our Instagram, if you go to our website, you'll see in the navigation bar that we have a creative enrichment studio, and you'll see our online immersions. We have weekly immersions of yin yoga to attune to your creative essence on Mondays. And on Fridays, we have the power of poetic form. We have monthly immersions. We have upcoming courses, group courses. We have a writing fellowship. We have a WhatsApp group. There are always ways to connect. The first call to action would be just go to the website, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get some writing prompts. And then you'll get next steps on how to join in with us from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the show and dancing. Like I'm a fish too. I got a bunch of Pisces in my chart. So
Oh, nice.
felt like we were a whole school of fish here.
Nice.
Swimming around in the flow. So really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
That you're doing in the world. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me. It's been a really fun conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Boundless Body with the Somatic Doctor. Please leave a comment, subscribe, and like us on social media.
We're a swarm. We're a colony. We're a multiplicity.
Until next time, be well.